Peverelle. I'm a Melbourne-based sculptor and artist, and I held a show last year at Mario's in Fitzroy, and it's my first major show for a very, very long time. I don't even want to put a number of years on it because it's embarrassing, but yes, I had a lot to do with the Fringe Festival back in the 80s and 90s, and was constantly exhibiting and curating shows for the Fringe. And then I had a big break raising kids and, essentially 20 years out of the caper. Always painting and drawing, but never really producing a body of work. So I separated from my ex-wife not long before COVID, and as we know in Melbourne, there wasn't much to do but hang around at home. So I used that time to find my way back to my art, which was, very difficult. As anyone who's ever left their creation and their creativity and come back to it, it's dogged. You kind of, like all art, music, poetry, whatever, you've got to turn up. So I just kept going into the studio day after day, and it was hard. It was difficult. We were dealing with COVID. I was dealing with a separation and ultimately divorce. But in terms of the art making, it's if you've had a reputation that's resulted from making your work, and you've sort of hit your straps, then you're up against yourself, and that's what I found really difficult. I think it's probably pretty common. So, you walk into the studio, you've done work that's, rated by others, if you like. I had my first show with Ken Scarlett, who is the sort of, I guess the critical, curatorial king of sculpture in Australia. He's wrote a book that's about yay thick called Australian Sculptors, and he's written 16 or 17 books, but he gave me my first show. I was in fourth year at art school. And so I was up against myself, I knew that there would be almost immediate disappointments, and you just got to kind of push through that. And eventually, inevitably, because I had the skills and I'd been successful in the past in terms of the art making. Probably the first 6 months or so was just pushing through that, and then slowly things started to emerge, and when you can kind of let go a bit, that's when things will come in. And so you kind of have to make a conscious choice to rejoice at what you find, not lament what you haven't achieved. Yeah. And I think that's true of all art making. You kind of got to get out of your own way and just sort of allow it to come through. So eventually that happened, and so the result was a show of 16 bronze wall pieces, roughly this size, most of them, and they were shown in May 22 at Mario's in Fitzroy. It's a cafe, not a gallery, but it's a gallery as well. Anyone in inner city Melbourne will know of Mario's and the reputation they have for showing some amazing art, over 30 plus years now.
I've had a few coffees.
Yes,
Mario's, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Take us back to the start of your career. How'd you get your start, and what led you into the Fringe Festival?
Well, the start was I went to Melbourne State College to train as a secondary art and craft teacher, and that was really the only intention I had when I arrived. I was, I guess, a bit of a journeyman in terms of my art. It was not really happening. I took a year off and then went away, came back. I guess in some ways a boy left college and a man returned, and I discovered that being able to access my emotions and thoughts and things started to feed into my art. I moved out of home. I think that's a crucial thing for any artist, be they poet, writer, musician. You just can't stay at home with your parents and expect to sort of discover more about yourself, which leads into your art. So I moved into Fitzroy. That was the home of the Fringe Festival, and I just got involved. It was all very organic, living on Brunswick Street in Fitzroy in '85. It was just sort of getting going. The Black Cat Cafe was there, Henry Mars and the extended sort of entourage, if you like, were there. And it was just a hotbed of creation. There was music, there was painters, theatre stuff. It was just, it was fantastic. So I just immersed in that, continued going to college, graduated, never taught. And then about halfway through fourth year, my lecturer introduced my work and another colleague of mine and close friend, Anderson Hunt, to Ken Scarlett, who at that time was the director of the Griffin Gallery, which was a gallery at Melbourne State College, but very much run on commercial principles. So he, in fact, refused to show the work of any students and lecturers, right? So, which, he had trouble defending at times, but he prevailed, and so halfway through fourth year, Reg Parker, who's passed away, another great Australian sculptor, alerted Ken to Anderson and I. Ken came by, we set up all our works. 2 days later, we had a show in the following year with the Griffin Gallery and Ken Scarlett, and that was really sort of the beginning of having a sense that what we were doing was valid. We weren't just kind of mucking around, or it really, him offering us the show just completely validated us. I mean, it's hard to describe the influence that he had on the world of sculpture in Australia, but it was immense. And he's still going. He's 95, and has just released a book on Gus Talava, who's quite a famous Australian sculptor, based in North Coburg, may I add.
Oh, right here.
Right here, where we're filming from today. So yeah, it was a combination of getting that uplift, because a few months after that, college ended. You're on your own. You're out there. We got a cheap studio over in West Brunswick, and there's about 3 or 4 of us in there for the next 10 years, and we just produced work for exhibition. And because we were steelies, working with in steel, using blacksmithing processes and casting in bronze, we augmented our art making with light engineering, basically welding up trailers and tow bars for people who were going by. Yeah, and it just flowed from there. We just, it was the time of share houses. Everyone in the share house was either an artist or in a band, or generally of that ilk. So it wasn't hard to continue, because we were surrounded by, as the kids might say, our peeps. Yeah.
I'd imagine someone with your skills and aptitudes could have gone into the trades and just become a tradesman.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because just that comment reminded me of when I was about 15. It was summer holidays, and we were, as per usual, in our caravan down at Point Lonsdale, and my mother and father took me aside and had this sort of more formal meeting than I'd ever had. And they said to me, now listen, you're good with your hands, and we thought maybe you'd want to leave high school and you might want to go to tech. And back in those days, that's where all the kids went to become plumbers and carpenters and all that. I was utterly bemused by their suggestion, because it just came out of nowhere, and it was well-meaning. But yeah, absolutely, David. I could have, if I was even slightly keen on that, I might have ended up at a tech and become a hard-working and contributing plumber or tradesperson. So
I'm definitely not saying you're not hard-working.
No, I know, but it was a funny little moment, never to be repeated. I simply said no. I'm happy at the high school with my mates, and then art unfolded. Yeah. But I want to stress for any younger people watching this is that you can change, you can augment. And I didn't find my art feat until I was probably in the beginning of third year art school. First couple of years I was just more or less adrift, as I say, working off being a young person, a boy, not really being able to access deeper thoughts that ultimately feed into your art. So yes, I mean, if I'd grown up in communist Russia, I probably would have been skewed off into the factories years earlier. Would never have got that far.
How did your folks handle the art school news?
Look, they were always comforted by the fact that I was getting a teaching degree at the same time. So I went to Melbourne State College, which is where most of the art teachers in Victoria at least were trained. You could go to art school like RMIT and do painting or sculpture, whatever, and then do a 1-year dip ed. But we did it concurrently. So it was a 4-year degree. We had all 16 different studio practice areas, and so they were comforted by that. But and they got used to the idea over the years that he wasn't going into a high school and teaching art. In fact, when I first got out of art school, I was grinding concrete and using a jackhammer for 8 hours a day. It freed your mind. I think that's the first thing. And one of my lecturers said to me, if you're going to do your art, and you clearly are, and you're capable, you've got some talent, and you've got things to flesh out there, he said, you might be better off cutting sandwiches for your job. Because if you go into a school, you will give your ideas away to the kids. Now, of course, they will manifest in vastly different ways than they would if they were in your hands. But he said that, something to think about. And I did, and then quickly I realised, along with a few others that I'd gone through this teacher training with, that we were better off to have free minds to do our art. So a mindless kind of job during the day actually suited us. And teaching, the first thing I thought about was responsibility, which you would absolutely have to bring to the table to do the best by the kids you were teaching. And I couldn't make that commitment to those kids, so I just didn't do it.
Okay, that was one of my questions. At what point did teaching kind of go out the window and art? But you've answered that.
Well, it went out the window halfway through fourth year when Anderson Hunt and I got this show with Ken, and we just thought, well, it's all about art for us. There's nothing else, So we just knuckled down and committed to that, and back then there weren't the public sculpture commissions that you see around now. I mean, just about every local council has sculpture or art programs within their budgets, and there was none of that. There was very little of it, So you were left to your own devices, and just producing work for exhibition,
Do you prefer that, just being left to your own devices?
Yeah, commissions are interesting. There's always a committee involved, which can be good and bad. It depends on the individuals, but a lot of committees want to have a say in the art, which I find odd. But excuse me. So we just, that's why we did the light engineering and just welded up stuff for people, basically. And that paid well enough. And, eventually we branched out and had other jobs and things like that. But I haven't taught a day in my life, so not formally anyway. Yeah. So, yeah.
You touched on something I'm quite curious about, actually. You mentioned about giving away your ideas, I guess, or holding them to your chest. Is that something a lot of artists do, or some are a little more open and will give away any idea they have, and others, I'm guessing, hold them quite close to their chest? what do you think of either one of those options, and do you tend to hold them to yourself?
I think the daily grind of being an art teacher in a high school or any teacher is incredibly demanding, never more so than now. And I think if you wanted to walk that kind of tightrope of, giving away your ideas, and by which I mean, it could be a very material-based idea, like, why don't you try using this medium? That it's generally a more esoteric concept that you're giving away bits of yourself. You want to see the kids go well, so you might keep informing them. They might be halfway through a painting and it's very difficult to resist the idea to say, well, you might want to think about that without guiding it so much. But I think what happens in that moment is that the idea has dissipated. Whatever it is, wherever it's come from, there's this sort of diluting of that, which runs sort of concurrently, if you like, to the commitment you make to those kids. And I think if you're free of that, then you can ponder and just sort of develop your own ideas, and in the absence of teaching as well, It's a bit like footy coaches, I think, in a way. I've always thought that some of the best football stars, I'm talking AFL here, don't make great coaches, and some of the journeyman players turn out to be excellent coaches. And I think educators are like that. Your heart's got to be in it.
Yeah.
It's an enormous job.
Yeah.
And if your heart's not in it, you'll be shown up. Yeah. And I just couldn't do it, ethically. I couldn't pretend to be invested in being a teacher. So, yeah, it's hard to put a finer point on it, but essentially it's about the dissipation of ideas that you may have floating around in your head and your heart that's kind of leak out to the classroom. And as I say, my head of department, he cautioned us and said, you might want to think about that and go and cut sandwiches instead of teaching kids art. So,
or grind concrete.
Yeah, or grind concrete, which, by the way, paid more than teaching at that time anyway. Yeah,
it probably does now as well, I imagine.
Possibly. It depends which concreter you're working for, I guess.
One thing I'm curious about is, where do you think art teachers might be maybe getting it wrong in the way they approach their students? And
To be honest, David, I couldn't say, because I've never been an art teacher. Yeah. I mean, I've taught people how to weld and that sort of thing, but it's always been an informal arrangement. So to be honest, I really couldn't say, because I've had almost nothing to do with it. Yeah. And a lot of my friends didn't go into teaching. They're still close friends today. Some of them are still practising artists. Others have kind of drifted off into other things. I mean, I guess one of the great divides at Melbourne State on a pedagogical, if that's the right word, level was half the lecturers were committed to teaching technique. So how to throw a pot on a wheel, how to do hand building, how to weld, those types of things. If you were up in... I went through an art school that was exceptionally well resourced. It was a 7-storey building. On every floor there was a different discipline. We had the drama kids in there, the music kids. Warren Ellis from the Dirty Three and Nick Cave, he was there on the 5th floor. Actually played some music at an opening of Anderson and mine, and actually wrote some songs. So I'm sort of getting off track here, but so in essence there was the school of thinking that let's teach technique and then see where the kids take that to make their art. Whereas the other half of the lecturers there, the ones I tended to kind of be drawn to, was you tell me your ideas and I'll teach you the techniques to do it. Okay. So it was a reversal. Yeah. And I think and there was a lot of acrimony over that. I've since found out between the lecturers, some of them left because of that. They didn't agree with having kids kind of drifting around, playing with ideas in their head, but not having the technical skills to be able to produce the objects or forms that they wanted to. I tend to think that, you know, you really must start with your ideas, and then let's kind of see about the techniques. Although I do think that base level techniques do need to be taught, but it's interesting. There were a lot of kids you could tell were very adrift, and kind of lost. You know, they didn't have, you know, that's all they wanted. They just wanted to be taught how to throw a pot on a wheel, or, you know, acquire those skills. I guess, you know, for a lot of them it was because they were contemplating that, you know, any minute now they're going to be in a classroom and someone's going to want to know how to do those things.
Yeah.
So, but by that stage I'd long since given away the idea of being an art teacher, and all I wanted to do was just make my stuff. And even our head of department said, look, you and Anson are just using this place like a private studio, which we found as a somewhat bracing comment at first. But he goes, but that's good.
Yeah, that's what you should be doing.
That's what you should be doing. Whereas there are other kids, and there were plenty of us like that, you know. But I guess probably more than half were there to get their degree, acquire the skills, and then just sort of disseminate that out through their careers as art teachers, and, you know, and bless them for that. You know.
So we've talked a lot about kind of the skills part of it, the making. Where does the creativity come from? Where's the inspiration for you come from?
Yeah, for me, I mean, my works are simply about my feelings, my emotions. That's where they come from. They're little love songs or poems. There's no hiding it. They're in the titles of my works, and they are very much reactions and responses to what's going on around me in my emotional world as it relates to others. Some kind of, you know, more natural world stuff comes in as well in terms of the environment, and some politics, but not a lot of focus on that. It's more about, you know, they're little kind of love songs, I guess, in a way. Yeah. So, yeah, straight from the heart, David.
And have you experimented with expressing these ideas through other mediums?
Yeah, I can't claim to have ever written a song, but I've contributed to a few, and I was a drummer and singer.
What songs? Maybe people can look at.
Oh, no one would have ever heard of that. I'm not diving myself in there. But look, I've written poetry for years and continued to do it, you know, badly. But you know, keep at it. But I think everyone knows at some point what's your thing. You know, are you a sculptor? Are you a songwriter? Are you a poet? And you know your strengths. Yeah. And so you've got to kind of go with that, really. It doesn't mean you have to stop all the other things. But, I mean, also paint and draw, which is, you know, as common as mud for sculptors. But I wouldn't consider myself a painter. I don't have the technical skill to pull off some of the things I would like to get on a canvas. But I do have that when it comes to sculpture and 3D work. So... And of course, it also depends on the genre. I mean, if you're painting kind of representational, figurative works, be they landscapes or portraits, then, you know, you need a certain ability with oil paints, for instance. But my work is always automatic. It's a bit like automatic writing. I just start, whether it's drawing or painting or sculpting. I just start, and I guess I rejoice in what I find rather than lamenting that I haven't been able to create what I was aiming for. You've got to kind of let go of that, I find, and I think a lot of creatives would concur.
So your work kind of, there's not a clear vision of what it's going to look like before you start?
Not really. I mean, there used to be, but I've long since given that away, because I think it leads to disappointment. It's also kind of putting barriers around where you might get to.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these works that I've got here with me, which are in bronze. There's another one down here. Oh, this is my little ship here. They're kind of heavy. I mean, clearly that's not an accident. That's an old ship, right? But so that was a very deliberate act. So I've just contradicted everything I've said. But the way it's presented, you know, with these kind of sail elements coming out of it, it's called DV unfurling. So the ship is functioning really as metaphor for soul or human person, and the DV is a maritime, it means dead vessel. So this was made post-separation at what I call high COVID, you know, Melbourne lockdown. So it's dead vessel unfurling. So in terms of aiming for something, I don't aim for it through the visual result, but I do and have always had a habit of naming works before I commence. And sometimes they come out of poems I've written, or it's just a line. And then I do have that in my mind or in my heart when I'm working. I try not to be, there's no point I've found in being, you know, doing it in a slavish sort of way, because it just kind of mitigates what you're going through. You know, it's kind of creativity's just got to kind of move through you in a way. So, but you know, this one here, this is it's a very figurative and kind of probably the most literal I get. I don't know if you can see that, but there's this kind of, you know, is this space, sky, there's this, you know, escarpment or rock ledge here. You won't see it necessarily, but there's a tiny little figure there, down there. And this piece is called That, Now This. And it's very much about separation, you know, because when I left the family home, I left not only my ex-wife, but my kids, and then straight into COVID. And so went from a very busy family house where I was primary carer to just being on my own, being alone. So I came up with that. I was writing some poetry one night. That, Now This emerged, and I just borrowed that out of my poem and thought, okay, I want to make a work that's about separation, about isolation, and that's the result. This one here.
It sounds like poetry is a way for you to kind of get your ideas.
Yeah, in a way.
Paper.
Yeah.
It's almost like your process for making these bronzes it starts from poetry and then becomes a bronze.
It starts from the heart, you know, and the emotions. It's a feeling state.
Yeah.
And so I just try and key into that, you know. The habit of pre-naming works actually came about by necessity when Anderson Hunt that is, and had our show with Ken Scarlett, the Griffin, had to produce the catalogue, right? And this is way back before computers, so the lead time for making the catalogue was probably months, you know, off to the printer, the typesetter and the finished artist and yada yada, all of that. And I didn't have enough work. So I pre-named about 3 works and then just went for it. And it worked. And then so I kind of used that thereafter. And that's, you know, that was back in 1987.
You feel like you're bullshitting a little bit there?
Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah. I don't think it was done with any kind of deep, you know, concern. It was just, you know, 22-year-old kid on the fly, you know, fuck it, I'll just bloody write this.
There's a bit of bullshit in every art piece.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, possibly. You know, you only the people that know your work really, really well might be able to unpack it. But yeah, there's a lot of concealing that goes on in art as well as revealing. Yeah, I think both are kind of operative. I try not to make my works too obvious, although these are fairly kind of straightforward in a way. This one is less so.
I quite like that one. It's probably
Thank
my
you.
favourite.
Is that right? Yeah. Well, this one sold. This isn't a bronze, actually. I've taken to faking them up. This is actually resin.
Oh.
Yeah. And so once I work directly in wax, which is what, if you're going to cast into bronze and use the lost wax process, then you have to end up with a wax, which is invested in plaster. The wax is burnt out in a kiln, and then the molten bronze is poured in and goes everywhere the wax once was. And that's about as simple as you can explain it, although there's a lot of missing information there which may not reveal anything. But this one here is called grottos. You probably can't quite make it out. There's a little figure sitting in there and another one over here. And, it's part of some sort of organic, I don't know, ethereal, space-like structure. And they're sitting within it. They're separate. They're in their own kind of little silos. And this kind of work comes straight from the heart. It just sort of emerges. So when I'm working in wax, my tools are fryer pans, hair dryers, hot air guns for stripping paint. And so I'm manipulating the wax as it could be liquid or semi-liquid. And then I kind of build them out of that. So, but I confess to forgetting, what was the question? What was it?
I can't remember. I've got a bad memory. Hey?
Okay.
What was it again?
That's,
Who knows?
who knows? Doesn't matter. We move on.
I'm so bad at this.
No. It's like, well, like all people being interviewed, as we touched on before we started, you start thinking and saying things that you've never ever pondered before, which doesn't mean that they're erroneous or shouldn't be valued, but it does come as a surprise.
Yeah.
But but there's a pureness in that, yeah, pureness of response. So.
I guess one question: there's a big gap in your career.
20 years.
Is there a regret there that you didn't
work
in that time? Yeah.
Yes, there is. Yeah, absolutely. But I was primary carer for my kids. My ex-wife was a lawyer, and I'm an artist. And in the simplest of terms, we made a domestic financial decision. I mean, who do you send off to bring home the bacon? Yeah. The lawyer or the artist? I mean, it's a no-brainer. So, and my ex was very committed to her career. That's fine. Being primary carer allowed me, I ran other little businesses and stuff along the side. But yeah, there is a lament, slight, but I would say the joy, I always wanted to have kids, so that happened. I wanted to have a family life, and that was always a focus. So in some ways, David, it wasn't, it was worth it. Yeah, it was worth it. I'm still young-ish. I've still got maybe 20 years or so ahead of me to come back to art. The kids are young adults. They're creatives as well. So I think that's a big plus too. One of my kids is a musician. The other one's a 3D artist. And there is that. They never really saw their father making a body of work until this show in May 22, following COVID. But the influence is there, and the positivity of being a creative person in that way, in visual art or music or whatever it is. So, it's. But I don't carry it around as a kind of a lament or a burden at all. I made those choices, and the other thing too, and I'm just going to say this because I think a lot of people may think it or they experience it, and that is that after 10 years of making art, after art school, just nothing else, I got quite frightened of poverty, because it's all right when you're 22, but when you get to 32 or 30 or something, some friends are buying houses. I could barely maintain my HQU, but I was working like a dog, cooking at night, that sort of thing, working in the studio in the day. And it's just a grinding sort of existence. And contemplating wanting to have a family and kids was just like, what? How are you going to pull this off, mate? So I did actually consciously drift away from fine art and moved into design. So I was producing a lot of work in glass, making a lot of lighting, architectural fittings and for architects and other designers. So, you know, I mean, I was going to say I've only got myself to blame, but it's not really a blame caper. It was just a conscious choice. I'd had a gutful of just not being able to pay my rego and, you know, I mean, it's, you know, wine. We've all heard this story before, but I think it's relevant because if you set off, you do the training as a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you know, there's a certain trajectory you can count on, and that is that you will get a job, it will be okay pay, but you'll move through the thing, and you'll end up here. You'll be able to have all those things, but for creatives, it's not a reliable trajectory. I had a flying start with Ken Scarlett and the Griffin Gallery. You couldn't hope to have shown with a better person but it doesn't feed the bulldog, right? Yeah. So you get tired, you know, and you can work really hard. And there's so many people out there who never get any accolades for their creative work. And, you know, I guess, yeah, you look around, you're 30 and you think, far out. How long can I do this? And the idea of being old and broke was something I just couldn't countenance.
Being young and broke.
Being young and broke.
It's not great, but it's not so bad, is it? But yeah, as you get older.
It's easier when you're 25 and you're in a share house in Fitzroy and you know, everyone's in a band and everyone's making a movie and, you know, it's like you're happy. You're just happy. But, yeah, things change as you get older. Your focuses and your desires change. I did want to have kids and I thought, well, I can't. How am I going to pull this off? You know, so something had to give. So I have no regrets. No, none, you know.
What would you say to someone, a young artist, maybe just out of art school, that's at that crossroads? They really want to be an artist. They, you know, want to be represented by a gallery or whatever. They're broke and they're sick of it. What advice would you give that person?
Well, I think firstly you have to distill down within yourself what's important, what's going to make you happy. Because I know I've got plenty of friends who were okay with that scenario, you know. It didn't mean that, a lot of their marriages didn't survive that because it's just hard when you work in a devoted and consistent and thoughtful way, yet you can spend all this time doing work and stuff for no money whatsoever. In fact, it's costing you. So I think you have to distill down what's important to you and you've got to simply align with that. If you have any aspirations of being, you know, a family person, having a family, you know, be you man, woman, non-binary, then you just have to align with that and you got to go with it, you know, because if you don't, you're kind of working upstream against the grain, against yourself. So, kind of abandoning art, which is essentially what I did, was aligning with what was really welling up within me at that time. And I mean, once I'd met my partner and we had kids, I did make work. I did continue to draw and paint. I was never really sculpting that much because you need facilities to do that. You know, sculpture. Of course, you can work in clay or wax, but it just didn't do it for me. I'd spent 15 or more years working in steel and bronze, and you just need equipment, and a proper studio where you can make noise and go nuts, you know. So, Yeah, I think like any choice you make in life, whatever it is,
Yeah.
you've just got to align as closely as you can with what's in your heart and follow that.
And having an outlet for that, no matter what happens, having an outlet for your creativity, because it could be anything. It could be cooking.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
could be drawing. But
Yes.
if you have that outlet, I think, you know, it doesn't matter. Whatever you do, life can be pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I mean, part of that is how aspirational are you with your art? Do you want to be in the best galleries in Australia? Do you want to be the next Whiteley or Boyd or whomever? You know, the art world's littered with examples of people who have devoted themselves utterly to their art and received no recognition, you know. Vincent sold, I think, 1 or 2 paintings, or 1 painting, I think, in the...
I think it's 1, yeah.
It's 1, and the guy sent it back. He didn't want
I
it.
didn't know that part of it. Oh, that's
I could
tragic.
I could have made that up, but I think that's right, yeah. I think his brother Theo was navigating that return of... What an idiot. Sent it back. So, yeah, I mean... but I think one of the foibles in all of that is that if you're using your art as some kind of just personal therapy, that's okay, but you may not be really hitting your straps, you know, because art has to be, if nothing else, it's got to be original. That's what I think every creator is going for. Whether they admit it consciously or not is another story, but that's where the excitement is, you know, to see what's coming off the page or in the form or, you know, in the song, whatever it is. That's the excitement. That's the get. Yeah, I find. So, but I think like any human activity, you've got to turn up, and you've got to just do the work. You can't dabble with this sort of stuff and expect much out of it. You know, you've got to be focused and, you know, you'll hear lots of artists talk about keeping office hours, you know, and it's true. You know, you've just got to turn up and do it.
Anything takes discipline and work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whether you're a farmer or, I don't know, chemical engineer, whatever you are, you know, the focus has to be there. But I think what happens to artists is they drift away from that and they'll just become dabblers,
Yeah.
you know, and that's okay if they're happy with that. But they probably won't make amazing art if it's not, you know, more or less a daily activity. But it's never too late.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the other story too. It's never too late. You can...
I'm at that stage myself of taking a bit of a break and just a bit of dabbling. So this is good advice just for me. Thank you.
That's free. You know what they say about free advice, don't you? It's not worth anything.
Thank you all the same.
You're welcome, sir.
But that was that. I don't know if I mentioned it. That was my last question.
Just now?
Yeah, I'll just not. Well, 5 minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I said it though. But I might
No, you didn't say it was your last
I said
question.
it in my head.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, you need to prompt me. We still rolling here? Is this...
Yeah, we're still
Oh,
rolling.
okay, right.
Yeah, but
Hello, everyone. Yeah.
well, that said, then thanks, Craig.
My absolute pleasure. This is you know, I've done a bit of radio and stuff over the years, many years ago, promoting the Fringe in a lot of ways or group shows, but this is the first art interview I've done in over 20 years. So I hope it's of some value to somebody.
I'm sure it is. Thank you.
My pleasure. Cheers, David.